It is midnight in Washington, 5 in London, and 2 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. Let's get a check of the main stories we're following at this hour. Top diplomats from Seoul and Washington see eye to eye on the need to join hands in dealing sternly with any future North Korean provocations. Now, in Japan's refusal to acknowledge its wartime history, although the two agree on the principles, South Korea and the U.S. may not be on the same page. Creative talent on the global stage is what President Park Geun-hye believes the country needs, as she calls for sweeping changes in the way students are taught at school in this country. On the latest boom in medical tourism to Korea, the nation's health tourism surplus surpasses $100 million for the first time ever. We'll have those stories and more, but first let us begin in Washington. Now, Korea has expressed to the U.S. that historical issues stand in the way of improving ties with in Northeast Asia, comments seemingly directed towards Japan following Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. Well, Seoul and Washington also agreed to increase efforts to ease tensions in this region and reiterated their united front against North Korea's nuclear threats. Yoo Li-an starts us off.
Korea has delivered its message to the United States that history disputes remain a stumbling block to improving relations in Northeast Asia. Following an hour-long meeting with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington Tuesday, Korean Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se said the current situation in the region calls for sincere actions, adding that the two agreed on the need to alleviate tensions.
Secretary Kerry and I also recognize the growing uncertainty pervading Northeast Asia in recent times. In particular, I pointed out that historical issues stand in the way of reconciliation and cooperation in this region.
While neither Yun nor Kerry directly mentioned Japan by name, the comments are almost certainly aimed at Tokyo, as they come just weeks after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine escalated tensions with Korea and China. The shrine honors Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals. The two officials also agreed to urge Pyongyang to get rid of its nuclear program.
We call on North Korea to denuclearize. We will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state, nor as a nuclear-armed state, and nor will the international community abide by that.
Emphasizing the two countries stand united, Kerry added the United States is fully committed to the defense of South Korea and said it will continue to modernize its military capabilities in preparation against any threat. Yoo Li-an, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. said Tuesday that it will send 800 additional soldiers as well as tanks and other armed vehicles to Korea to rebalance its forces across the Asia-Pacific. Now, the troops' N-182 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles from the 1st U.S. Cavalry Division will start a 9-month deployment on February 1st, just south of the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas. Now, Army Colonel Steve Warren said that the troop increase has long been planned and it is part of the U.S.'s rebalance of its military power in the Asia-Pacific region. The U.S. already has roughly 28,000 troops stationed here in Korea. The announcement came after talks between Korea's Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se and Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel at the Pentagon. Korea and the U.S. have reportedly agreed to adopt a document dealing with nuclear exports and management of spent nuclear fuel. The document, separate from the two sides' civilian nuclear energy accord to be revised by March 2016, will ease the process for Korea to obtain nuclear power plant parts from the U.S. to be exported elsewhere and encourage cooperation in spent fuel reprocessing technologies. Seoul has been pushing Washington to allow it to enrich its own uranium and reprocess spent nuclear fuel to meet its growing energy needs, but the U.S. remains reluctant to agree due to proliferation concerns. After wrapping up their 9th round of negotiations in Korea's central city of Daejeon Wednesday, the two sides will resume talks in April. Now, a move that is sure to further escalate tensions in Northeast Asia. Japan's ruling party has set constitutional reform and continued visits to the Yasukuni Shrine as key goals for the coming year. Oh Jin-ju has the details.
Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has unveiled its key goals for the coming year: reform the constitution and continue with visits to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. During a general meeting on Tuesday, the party decided to, quote, make practical constitutional reforms without damaging the original purpose of the country's pacifist constitution. The party also vowed not to wage war and agreed to uphold the tradition of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors 2.5 million Japanese war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals. With regard to education, the party promised to ensure that students will not be taught a pessimistic concept of history by putting in place measures for making and adopting textbooks. Those plans, however, are expected to face a strong backlash from Korea and China. The biggest concern being brought up in both countries is that Japan is trying to become a country that is allowed to engage in war by amending its pacifist constitution. The current constitution, adopted after the nation's defeat in World War II, bans the country from using military force.
Should the Japanese leader avoid facing Japan's history of militaristic invasion and not take sincere steps toward reflecting on its past wrongdoing, the country will be led down a wrongful and dangerous path.
The decision to continue visits to the war shrine is also expected to draw criticism not only from Seoul and Beijing, but many countries around the world, just as it did after Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's latest visit there. In line with its goals for the coming year, the Abe administration has also officially launched a secretariat of the National Security Council that will serve as the control tower for the government's security policies. Oh Jin-ju, ARIRANG News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye has called for an educational revolution to foster creativity in the nation's young people. Speaking at a New Year's ceremony with members of the education sector, the president said that classrooms should be a space where students can develop their dreams and talents, not one for competition over college admissions. The president vowed to change the nation's education paradigm one step at a time so that students are free to be creative and develop both their intellectual abilities and personality traits. And the Korean leader has urged lawmakers and members of the ruling Saenuri Party to help the government realize her 3-year economic innovation plan. Speaking over dinner at the presidential office with the ruling party members Tuesday evening, the president rallied support for her goal of putting the country on the path to a per capita income of $40,000 before her term ends. Now, to achieve that goal, the president pledged to ease regulations in areas that can spur job creation. Saying the division of the two Koreas stand in the way of the nation's full potential, the president also urged the ruling party to work towards reunification. The party leadership vowed to work closely with the government and bring normalcy to parliament, which was deadlocked for much of last year.
All of the day's important events. Events close to home, around the world.
Second half last, figure out what winners.
The arts and culture scene and the heart of global business. ARIRANG News has your whole day covered.
The legislature will convene a plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring.
Korea's finance ministry says the domestic economic recovery is gathering momentum despite lingering global economic uncertainties, which are casting a cloud over what would otherwise represent an optimistic outlook. Well, in its monthly Green Book report released Wednesday, the ministry said major economic indicators like production and investment improved last October and November compared to the third quarter of last year. It also cited stabilizing prices and expanding employment. However, the report also pointed to the weak Japanese yen and the U.S. Federal Reserve's bond-buying stimulus tapering as major uncertainties that could hurt the nation's growth rate in the longer run. Well, this country saw a boom in the medical tourism industry last year, with the nation's health tourism surplus topping $100 million for the first time. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that the country's income from medical tourism was $187 million in the first 11 months of last year, growing more than 35% from the same period in 2012. Well, during the same period, however, local residents' overseas spending on medical tourism decreased by more than 11%. Korea saw its first surplus in the medical tourism industry back in 2011. Taking a brief look at how the local stock market is doing at this hour. Seoul shares were trading nearly flat on this Wednesday, with foreign demand supporting the main bourse, while institutions were largely sellers, tightly capping the stock market's gains. As of 1:30 p.m. Korea time, the benchmark Kospi was trading in negative territory by 0.1% at 1957, while the Tech-Heavy Kosdaq was up by a whopping 1.1%. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency was trading stronger against the greenback at roughly 1,065 won. Korean tech giants Samsung and LG are facing competition from Japanese and Chinese companies in an increasingly heated battle for the ultra-high-definition TV market. Now, at the Consumer Electronics Show now running in Las Vegas, Samsung and LG both rolled out their lineups of curved UHD TVs as Sony and other Japanese companies showcased UHD TV lines of their own. The Chinese budget TV maker TCL unveiled a line of UHD TVs that are less than half the price of Samsung and LG's models, which are priced between $30,000 and $70,000 US. Market analysts expect UHD TV sales of around 12 million units for this year. In a move seen as an important step toward dismantling Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, the first batch of chemical weapons materials was loaded onto a ship and taken out of that country on Tuesday. The operation is the first step in a UN-led deal to rid the country of its deadly chemical arsenal. Son Jung-in has the details.
Raw materials for poison gas were loaded Tuesday onto a Danish cargo ship at Syria's port of Latakia in what is being seen as a major milestone in a plan to rid the country of its chemical arms by the middle of this year. The UN and the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog responsible for ensuring the weapons destruction said the Danish ship is on course for a meeting with the US Navy vessel that will then take the cargo out to international waters where it will be destroyed. The chemicals were scheduled to be removed from Syria by December 31st, but a worsening domestic conflict, bad weather, and other factors delayed the operation by a week. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical weapons by June of this year under a deal brokered by the US and Russia. The deal came about in response to a chemical weapons attack on a Damascus suburb last August that left at least 1,400 civilians dead. Since then, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces have been under international pressure over allegations that he used sarin nerve gas in the attack. The weapons removal operation is taking place against the backdrop of a widening civil war and escalating infight between rebel factions. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the war, now in its third year, has killed more than 130,000 people. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
In the United States, the worst cold spell in about 2 decades is gripping much of the nation. Record-shattering low temperatures have grounded flights and halted trains, and at least 20 deaths have been blamed on the weather since last week. Here's ARIRANG News' Connie Lee.
A blast of Arctic air has settled over much of the eastern United States. In upstate New York, the cold is visible in the frozen roads and buildings covered in snow. Washington, D.C. is also suffering from the abnormally low temperatures.
It's not good. This is like the coldest we've had it in years, and it's sad.
On Tuesday, the National Weather Service said that temperatures from the Midwest to the Southeast were expected to be 14 to 19 degrees lower than average for this time of year. Central Park in New York hit a record low of minus 16 degrees Celsius, and usually mild Atlanta, Georgia in the south reported its coldest temperature in 44 years at minus 14 degrees Celsius.
We're not used to it at all, so we're not prepared.
The deep freeze grounded nearly 2,000 U.S. flights on Tuesday and delayed more than 1,000 others, according to one airline activity website. And 3 Amtrak trains that were heading into Chicago came to a halt, leaving more than 500 passengers stranded overnight.
When we passed Princeton, he said we coming to a little delay. That delay lasted 12 and a half hours. There wasn't no delay.
Since last week, at least 20 weather-related deaths have been attributed to the cold. And outside of the U.S., Western Europe has also been battling some of its worst storms in 2 decades. Torrential rains and high winds have caused massive flooding and power outages this week. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Well, former NBA star Dennis Rodman has never shied away from controversy, but he took things to a new level, even for him on Tuesday, having a complete meltdown on CNN when asked about a missionary detained in North Korea. When the CNN anchor asked Rodman whether he would use his visit to North Korea to raise the case of Kenneth Bae, a Korean-American, of course, tour guide who has been imprisoned in North Korea for over a year on vague charges of hostile acts against the state, Rodman erupted into a foul-mouthed rant in which he said Bae deserved to be serving time. He also tried to defend his heavily criticized basketball diplomacy tour. Rodman is currently in Pyongyang for an exhibition game against the North Korean national team Wednesday in what they are saying is a birthday present for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Meanwhile, over in Russia, it has put its security forces in Sochi on combat alert with exactly 1 month before the start of the Winter Olympics. 2 recent suicide bomb attacks in the nearby city of Volgograd has put that country on edge, and Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to ensure the games run without incident. The clearest threat comes from Islamist groups, particularly Chechen rebel leader Doku Umarov, who has publicly called on militants to use maximum force to prevent the games going ahead. As part of the tight security, cars without local license plates or special permits are not allowed to enter the city or go near Olympic facilities, and visitors must register with local authorities within 3 days or they risk being thrown out. More than 30,000 police and soldiers are also on the ground to help the other 7,000 security personnel secure the area. Now, on a different note, a rare 18th century Buddhist tapestry has returned to Korea decades after it was stolen during Japan's colonial rule of Korea. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won tells us more.
This grand Buddhist tapestry, which is more than 3 meters square, is believed to have been made in early 18th century Korea. It shows Buddha giving a sermon to his followers. Experts believe the textile's artistic value lies in the way it depicts Buddha and his followers. Most paintings show Buddha's disciples sitting behind him, but in the tapestry, 2 disciples sit in front of Buddha, listening attentively as he speaks.
Numerous artists have drawn Buddha's disciples, but this tapestry depicts them in a deeply moving way that touches the hearts of viewers. I personally believe that proves that the tapestry has artistic value and should be designated a national treasure.
The tapestry was stolen from a Buddhist temple in Korea during Japan's colonial rule in the early 20th century. It was then sold to a famous Japanese art dealer. Later, it was auctioned in New York in 1944 and sold for $450 to a museum in Virginia. The tapestry had been rolled up in a storeroom for some 40 years until the museum turned it over to the Overseas Korean Cultural Heritage Foundation last month. It is currently housed at the National Museum of Korea. The tapestry is one of the many artworks that were taken or stolen during Japan's 35-year colonial rule over the peninsula in the early 20th century. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
And now it's time for a daily look at the world of arts and culture. For that, we have our Lee Tae-ho in the studio. Good afternoon to you, Tae-ho.
Good afternoon.
So it is movie day, and so some great new movies should be coming out for the weekend, right?
That's right. Now, we have some great new films to look forward to this week. And with the current success that animated films have been having, I think we can look forward to several very highly anticipated animated films opening in the next several weeks, starting with the one that we'll be previewing today. Also, Leonardo DiCaprio is back with one of the legendary filmmakers, Martin Scorsese, in their latest film. Let's take a look. Opening tomorrow is the 3D animation Tarzan, based on the classic book Tarzan of the Apes, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1914. The film was directed by German producer Reinhard Kluse and stars the voice of Kellen Lutz. It's just one of the many different variations of the classic tale of the boy who is raised by apes. This adaptation revolves around the story of Tarzan and Jane Porter as they fight off a mercenary army dispatched by the CEO of Greystoke Energies, which coincidentally is the same man who took over the company that was run by Tarzan's parents. And another great opening to look forward to this week is The Wolf of Wall Street, directed by one of the greatest filmmakers of our generation, Martin Scorsese. It features an all-star cast headed by Leonardo DiCaprio, Jonah Hill, and the cameo appearance of Matthew McConaughey. The film is based on the true-life events of larger-than-life stockbroker Jordan Belfort, whose rise to riches were achieved by defrauding blue-collar American workers. Making millions through the trading and selling of penny stocks, the film documents his extravagant life of debauchery and drugs, all paid for, of course, by fraudulent money earned through his magical sales pitches. The Wolf of Wall Street will be prowling theaters everywhere starting tomorrow, the 9th of January.
Well, Teo, The Wolf of Wall Street, for one, is making a lot of headlines, and perhaps for the wrong reasons.
That's right. Now, the film itself is said to be wonderfully made, which is no big surprise because it is a Scorsese film. However, there are some things that maybe conservatives saying that maybe the film was too well made.
How could a film be too well made, Teo?
Well, these conservative audiences are kind of saying that maybe in this film that Scorsese was condoning the actions of Belfort, who is seen very much living it up with funds that weren't his. So a lot of people are kind of worried about the lack of morals in the film.
Right, so I suppose it leads to a question whether a filmmaker should be a moral person or not, and we need to, I don't know, judge on the morality of the filmmaker. So that's another question that we could revisit. Now, so today is the movie day, and you will be wrapping it up by giving us the movie rankings, right?
That's right. Now, we take a look at what other films are currently hot at the Korean box office. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top 5 films right here in Korea. And starting off our list this week at number 5 is the animated film The House of Magic by French production and distribution company Studio Canal and the Belgian animation studio ENDER'S. The film was directed by ENDER'S founder Ben Stassen and director Jeremy de Grussen. The story revolves around an abandoned young cat named Thunder who stumbles into a strange house that is owned by an old magician. But when the current residents plot to evict the new tenant, Thunder must fight to earn a place in his new home. Number 4 is the sci-fi adventure film ENDER'S Game, which is based on the novel by Orson Scott Card and was directed by Gavin Hood. The film also features an all-star cast, including big names such as Harrison Ford and Asa Butterfield. At number 3 this week is another film based on a story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, directed by and starring Ben Stiller. The film is based on the short story of the same name, which was written in 1939 by James Thurber. And the runner-up this week at number 2 is the Korean action thriller, The Suspect, directed by Won Shin-yeon and starring Kong Yoo and Park Ki-sun. And the top honors go to the Korean film The Attorney, starring Song Kang-ho and directed by Yang Woo-seok. The film follows Song Woo-seok, whose one and only goal as a tax attorney is to make money. That is, until one day he meets a terrorized student activist, Chinu, who is unjustly beaten and tortured for his views. Will Woo-seok jeopardize his career and his future to defy an unjust system? Find out in the number 1 film of the week, The Attorney.
Great top movies, but the attorney is just sweeping the ticket offices these days here in Korea.
That's right. It just hit the 8 million mark in just about 20 days. I think we'll very shortly be hearing about the attorney hitting the all-important 10 million mark very soon.
That would be a landmark moment for the Korean film industry as well. And the runner-up this week, The Suspect, is also quietly making a name for itself.
That's right. Now, unfortunately, the timing of the release was kind of unfortunate. It ran into the big roadblock, the blockbuster, The Attorney, but it will be opening on January 10th in 14 major cities in the United States, so it's certainly done something right as well.
All right, we hope to see it received well by the U.S. audience as well. Thank you for that, Taeho, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast, but stay tuned to ARIRANG. We have a lot more coming your way at 4 p.m. Korea time.